A kind waitress paid for an old man's coffee, never knowing he was a billionaire searching for his future wife. The downtown cafe bustled with morning life, filled with the gentle hum of conversations and the comforting clink of porcelain. Rain tapped softly against the wide windows, blurring the city beyond and wrapping the room in a cozy stillness. The scent of freshly brewed coffee blended with the earthy aroma of rain-soaked pavement, offering warmth to those escaping the cold. The door creaked open, letting in a rush of chilly air. A man in his early 50s stepped inside, his thin, worn coat clinging to him, soaked through. Water dripped from its hem onto the gleaming floor, his scuffed shoes leaving faint trails in his wake. His salt and pepper hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, tired and sunken, hinted at years of quiet struggle. He approached the counter with hesitant steps, scanning the menu before meeting the eyes of the young waitress behind the register. "Just a black coffee, please," he murmured. As she rang up the order, he reached into his pockets, but his hand came up empty. Panic flickered across his face as he patted down every pocket, his movements turning frantic. I'm so sorry," he stammered, voice thick with embarrassment. "I thought I had my wallet." The waitress offered a small, warm smile. "Don't worry about it," she said gently. "This one's on me." He looked at her, stunned, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came. He simply nodded, accepting the cup with trembling hands. What she didn't know was that the man she'd just shown kindness to wasn't just an old, tired stranger. He was a billionaire. And he was looking for someone real. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I must have left my wallet at home. If it's all right, could I just sit here for a while until the rain lets up?" The barista, young, with a chiseled jaw and an air of superiority, folded his arms across his chest and smirked. "Look, buddy," he said, loud enough for half the cafe to hear, "this isn't a shelter. We don't hand out freebies to people who can't pay. No money, no seat." A few heads turned, the older man's face flushed with heat, a deep red blooming across his cheeks. He took a small step back, his eyes fixed on the polished floor. "I wasn't asking for a free drink," he said quietly. "Just a place to stay dry for a bit." From a corner table, a chuckle rang out. A group of sharply dressed patrons had paused their conversation to watch the scene unfold, amusement flickering in their eyes. "Imagine that," one of them scoffed. "Wanders into a cafe without a cent and expects service." "Some people have no shame," another added, voice thick with mockery. "Guess being broke comes with a side of boldness." "Maybe next he'll ask for caviar," someone else snickered. The man's shoulders sagged under the weight of their ridicule. Humiliation clung to him like the wet fabric of his coat as he turned slowly toward the door, each step heavy with quiet defeat. From across the room, Emma, a 29-year-old waitress with auburn hair tied in a loose ponytail, watched the exchange unfold. Her hazel eyes, usually soft and welcoming, now burned with quiet fury. Balancing a tray of empty cups and plates, she weaved through the bustling cafe and stopped at the counter. With a firm clatter, she set the tray down and reached into the pocket of her simple uniform, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. She placed it on the counter without hesitation. "That's enough," she said, her voice calm but cutting, slicing through the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the room. The barista's smirk faltered. He stared at her, incredulous. "Emma, seriously? What are you doing?" he scoffed. "You don't have to pay for this guy. He can't just walk in and expect free stuff." Emma's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of every smug onlooker. Her posture was steady, her voice unwavering. "I'm covering his coffee," she said firmly. "Not because I pity him, but because I know how it feels to be looked down on for not having enough." A mocking laugh broke out from the table in the corner. "How noble," a man jeered, raising his half-empty cup in mock salute. "A waitress playing the hero." Emma didn't flinch. "Better to be a hero," she said quietly, "than someone who mocks kindness from behind a full cup." A hush fell over the room. "Maybe you're just hoping for a tip from him later," someone sneered. Emma turned slowly to face the room, her spine straight, her expression unshaken. Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the lingering echoes of laughter. "Kindness isn't a transaction," she said. "It doesn't cost us to show compassion. But belittling someone in need, that reveals true smallness." Silence fell across the cafe. The earlier snickers and whispers dissolved into an uneasy hush as eyes dropped to coffee cups and phones. Emma turned back to the man and offered a gentle, genuine smile. "Please," she said softly, "have a seat. I'll bring your coffee over shortly. And don't let their words decide your worth." The man met her gaze, his eyes glassy with emotion. He gave a slight, grateful nod and made his way to a seat by the rain-streaked window. There, he sat quietly, watching the droplets race down the glass. As Emma prepared his drink, the mood in the cafe shifted. No one dared meet her eyes. The amusement they once felt had been replaced with quiet shame and introspection. In that moment, wearing a humble uniform, facing down cruelty, Emma stood taller than anyone else in the room. And the man, once dismissed as a beggar, had been reminded of his dignity by a single act of grace. Later, as she wiped down the last table of her shift, the moment lingered like a soft echo. No one had spoken to her directly since, only glances, whispers, and a heavy silence that clung to the air like smoke. The next morning, her manager Brian called her into the back office. The small room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and bleach. He didn't look up from his clipboard. "Close the door," he said curtly. Emma obeyed, standing silently as Brian folded his arms across his chest. "This is a business, Emma, not your personal charity project." She said nothing. "You don't get to decide who gets free drinks," he continued, his tone sharpening. "If you want to play Mother Teresa, do it off the clock." "I paid for it," Emma said calmly. "That's not the point," he snapped. "You embarrassed your coworker, made the customers uncomfortable." Emma looked him directly in the eye. "No, he embarrassed himself." Brian's jaw tightened. "Don't test me," he said coldly. "You're here to serve coffee, not give sermons." A long, tense beat of silence hung between them. "Can I go?" Emma asked. "Get out," Brian muttered. "And remember your place." Back in the kitchen, Marcy and Josh stood by the sink. They fell silent the moment Emma walked in. As she passed, Marcy muttered just loud enough to be heard. "Must be nice, acting noble when you still split rent with your sick sister." Josh chuckled under his breath. Bet she thought the guy was some secret millionaire. Emma didn't respond. She grabbed her coat, signed out without a word, and stepped into the drizzle outside. The air was thick with the scent of wet pavement and city smoke. She didn't rush. The apartment she shared with Lily wasn't much. A cramped one-bedroom with chipped paint, squeaky floors, and a window that never quite sealed. When she stepped inside, the warmth was faint but familiar. Lily lay curled on the couch, wrapped in a worn blanket, her small frame shivering slightly. "Hey," Emma whispered, brushing her sister's damp forehead. "You're late," Lily mumbled without opening her eyes. Emma smiled gently. Got caught in the rain. She reheated a bowl of old porridge, stirred in a little salt, and handed it to Lily with care. Then she checked her wallet. $3, one worn subway token, a faded photo of their mother. She stared at the bills in her hand for a long moment, then folded them slowly and slid them back into her pocket. No regret. Not for the coffee, not for the silence, not for the ridicule. After Lily fell asleep, Emma sat by the window, knees pulled to her chest, watching the rain trace slow, steady lines down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, pale, but not broken. A quiet strength lingered in her eyes, like a flame that refused to go out. Her thoughts wandered, 15 years back, to a street market in another life, another season. She was just a girl then, gripping her mother's hand when it suddenly went limp. Her mother collapsed without warning and people had walked past. Some glanced, most didn't. Only one person had stopped, an old woman in a patched skirt. She knelt beside them, offered water, wrapped a shawl around Emma's shoulders. No name, no explanation, just kindness. That moment it stayed with her. It became a promise. And today she had kept it. So when Emma saw that man in the cafe, wet, ashamed, invisible, there had been no decision to make. She simply did what needed to be done. The judgment didn't matter. He mattered. That night before turning off the light, she whispered into the dark, just for herself, "I'd rather be mocked for doing the right thing and praised for staying silent." And in that small apartment with nothing to spare but her own dignity, Emma felt something rare. Peace. 4 days had passed since the incident, 4 long shifts filled with half-heard whispers and glances that lingered a little too long. Emma was no stranger to being invisible. She had learned to move through spaces unnoticed, unbothered, but now she was seen for something she hadn't sought, and the stares felt heavier than silence ever had. That morning the cafe hummed with its usual rhythm, cups clinking, steam hissing, idle chatter floating between tables. Emma moved from table to table, wiping crumbs, stacking plates, offering polite smiles like armor. Then the doorbell chimed. She didn't look up immediately, just kept wiping the counter. But something shifted, the air stilled, as if holding its breath. A quiet pull of curiosity tugged at her. She glanced toward the door. A tall man had stepped inside, dressed in a charcoal gray suit and a silk scarf. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his polished shoes tapping softly on the floor with each step. He looked like someone from another world, a man of boardrooms and city views, not mismatched mugs and sticky tabletops. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Calm. Familiar. Watching her like they already knew something others didn't. Emma froze, cloth in hand. He didn't go to the counter. He walked to the table by the window, the same seat where a soaked, humiliated man had once sat, and took it without a word. Emma stood still for a moment, cloth in hand, her heart suddenly thudding with quiet urgency. She took a breath and approached with a menu, uncertain whether to pretend not to recognize him or acknowledge the truth that hung in the air. Before she could speak, he looked up. "I'm not here to order," he said gently. She paused. "I only have one question." His voice was calm, but weighted. "Why did you help me?" Emma blinked, caught off guard. I just couldn't watch it happen." "You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain." She hesitated. Then, with quiet honesty, "You didn't look like someone asking for a handout. You looked like someone being made to feel small." Her voice softened. "And I know that feeling." She slid into the seat across from him, the menu untouched between them. "When I was 17, she began, my mom collapsed in the middle of a street market. People walked around her like she didn't exist, like she was in the way." Her eyes dropped to the table. "Except one woman, an old lady with patched clothes and kind eyes. She knelt beside us, gave my mom water, and wrapped her shawl around my shoulders." Emma looked up. She had so little, but she stopped. "And I promised myself, if I ever got the chance, I'd be like her." He didn't interrupt. He just listened, fully present. "That day in the cafe," she said softly, "I remembered that promise." A few beats of silence passed. Rain tapped gently against the window. Then he asked, "Do you read?" Emma blinked. "Books?" He nodded. "Yes." "I used to," she said. "Not much lately." "I always liked stories about ordinary people," he said with a faint smile. "Doing brave things when no one was watching." His gaze held hers for a moment longer. Grateful, thoughtful, and something else, something unspoken. They talked about books, cities, music, Bach, Chopin, why people grow cruel when they feel powerless. He mentioned authors Emma had never read, and she didn't pretend to know them. She listened with curiosity, not pretense, and answered honestly, asking questions that made him pause, then smile. Minutes passed, then more. The cafe noise faded into a soft background hum. At one point, Emma laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in days. "You're not what I expected," she said, eyes still glinting with amusement. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" She shrugged lightly. "Someone who just wanted to say thank you and disappear." He looked down, then met her eyes again. "I've had wealth for a long time," he said. "But very few people have made me feel human again." He paused. "That day, you did." Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. In that moment, they were just two people. Not a waitress and a billionaire, not a stranger and a savior. Just two souls, finally seen. And neither of them would forget it. Exactly 1 week after their second meeting, Emma received an envelope. There was no return address, no sender's name, just a thick, cream-colored envelope with her name handwritten in deep blue ink. Emma L. Bennett. Inside, she found a heavy ivory card. Its edges gilded, the paper softly textured like silk. Embossed in gold at the top was a familiar crest, the unmistakable emblem of the Aninsli, a five-star hotel in the heart of the city. The kind of place that hosted royalty, diplomats, and people with black cars and silent chauffeurs. Certainly not waitresses from rain-worn corner cafes. Printed clearly at the top, Emma L. Bennett, guest of Charles H. Everlyn. She stared at the envelope for a long time, the afternoon light catching the gold seal like it was whispering a secret. It dared her to open it. She almost didn't go, but curiosity mixed with something tighter, deeper drew her to the hotel 3 days later. She wore her only decent blouse, borrowed shoes that pinched slightly at the heel, and her hair pinned back with trembling fingers. The moment she stepped through the revolving doors, it was like crossing into another universe. Polished marble floors gleamed beneath her feet. Chandeliers spilled light like liquid crystal. Everyone moved with a kind of quiet entitlement, as if the world had always made space for them. Emma approached the front desk, her voice just steady enough. Emma Bennett. I think I have a meeting? The concierge didn't blink, didn't hesitate, just nodded as if he'd been expecting her all along. You're expected, he said. Mr. Everlyn is waiting in the Skyline Lounge, 21st floor. The name felt heavier spoken aloud. Mr. Everlyn. She rode the elevator in silence, heart thudding against her ribs like it was trying to warn her of something big. The lounge was hushed and elegant. Deep leather chairs, soft jazz curling through the air like incense. A wall of glass looked out over the city skyline, dusk painting the horizon in muted gold and storm gray. Emma stood by the window, arms loosely folded, unsure if she belonged anywhere near this kind of world. Then the door opened. She turned. It was Charles, but not the rain-soaked man from the cafe, and not even the polished stranger from the second meeting. This version of him was something else entirely. He wore presence like a tailored suit. A quiet kind of power followed him as he entered, flanked by two assistants who peeled away at the door without a word. He didn't demand attention. He simply had it. And yet, his eyes, when they found hers, were the same. Soft, grateful, curious, and very, very real. Emma, he said, his voice low and even. Thank you for coming. She tried to smile, but it faltered at the edges. This isn't exactly a coffee shop. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. He gestured toward a table near the window, already set with tea, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a single, untouched espresso.
Please, he said gently, sit.
She obeyed, still unsure if this was an invitation or an evaluation. As she lowered herself into the chair, he took the seat across from her, folding his hands with quiet precision. I wanted to tell you in person, he began, because anything less would have felt dishonest. Emma waited, uncertain, heart ticking louder than the soft jazz behind them. My name, he said carefully, is Charles H. Everlyn. I'm the founder of Everlyn Holdings. We operate in 12 countries, mostly infrastructure, sustainable ventures, social investment. Emma blinked, her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. I wasn't pretending to be someone else, he added quickly. But that morning at the cafe, I was testing something. I dressed down, I left my wallet behind on purpose. I needed to see how I'd be treated when no one had anything to gain. She stared at the tea in front of her, the steam curling into the air like questions she wasn't ready to ask. My wife died 15 years ago, he continued, his voice softer now. Cancer. It happened quickly. We never had children. And when she was gone, I stopped trusting people. Intentions, all of it. I thought kindness was just another mask people wore when it served them. He looked directly at her, his gaze steady. So I started traveling. Quietly, disappearing into places where no one knew my name, not just to see the world, but to see who was still living with heart in it. His words hung there, suspended like breath before the fall. That day, in that cafe, he said, I found someone. Emma finally lifted her eyes to meet his. The weight of his story sat between them, heavy, real, human. She didn't smile, she didn't flinch, she just listened. And somehow in that silence, she answered. Emma's throat tightened, her pulse quickened, and she wasn't sure if the feeling rising in her chest was awe or betrayal. "You set me up?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to betray the storm inside. Charles met her gaze calmly. "No, I didn't approach you. I didn't ask for anything. I simply watched. And you made a choice." She shook her head slowly, her jaw clenched. "I don't know whether to feel honored or manipulated." "I understand that," he said softly. "I do." Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the rug in a quiet protest. "So what now?" she demanded. "You tell me I passed your little morality test. Then what? You write me a check? Offer me a car? A new life?" Charles didn't flinch. His voice remained calm. "I offer you nothing you haven't already earned, unless you choose to hear me out." Her breath hitched. Anger, confusion, admiration, and disbelief warred behind her eyes. She was a waitress in borrowed shoes, standing in a gilded room, being told she'd restored a billionaire's faith in humanity. He rose too, walked slowly toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "I wasn't testing you, Emma," he said, his reflection faint in the glass. "I was searching for something I feared the world had lost. A reminder of what it means to be seen. Not as a bank account or a burden, but simply as a man." She stood frozen, staring at him as if the truth had rearranged everything she thought she knew. "I don't want to buy your gratitude," he added. "I don't want to turn this into a transaction." He turned to face her fully. "But I would like to ask, would you have a coffee with me again? No expectations, no pretenses, just us." Emma looked at him, not at the tailored suit, not at the luxury lounge or the glittering skyline, but at his eyes, the same eyes that once looked down in shame, soaked through, clutching a worn coat, asking only to stay dry. That man hadn't vanished. He stood right here, and somehow, that truth mattered more than anything else. She let out a slow breath. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly, "or what you think it could be. But I know who I am." Charles turned, something unreadable but sincere in his expression. "And who is that?" he asked. She smiled, a small, steady thing, full of quiet certainty. "Someone who didn't do it to be noticed, and someone who's not afraid to walk away if that's all this turns out to be." He nodded, his eyes warming. The corners of his mouth lifted just enough. "That's what makes you different." And in that moment, Emma understood. This hadn't been a test, it was an invitation, not into money or status, but into something far rarer, being seen and being remembered. Not for who you impress, but for who you choose to be when no one is watching. Emma hadn't expected to hear from Charles again. Part of her believed their conversation at the hotel was the end of something odd and fleeting, a surreal moment that didn't belong in her world, a window she had looked through but was never meant to step beyond. But the next afternoon, another envelope arrived. No gold seal this time, just her name, handwritten in careful penmanship. Inside a note, short, steady, sincere. "Emma, I'm traveling to Montreal next week. I visit every year. It's quieter there, peaceful. I'd like you to come. Not for business, not for formality, just company, just conversation. No expectations, only a sincere invitation. Charles." Tucked inside was a round-trip train ticket. She held it in her hand for a long time, the edges soft between her fingers like a question waiting to be answered. That night, in their cramped kitchen, Emma stood over the stove, watching rice simmer as steam fogged the window. In the living room, Lily curled under a blanket, coughing between slow sips of tea. "You're quiet," Lily said. Emma smiled faintly. "That's rare, huh?" Lily tilted her head. "You thinking about him?" Emma nodded. She told her everything, the invitation, the ticket, the strange feeling of a door opening, a door she never imagined she was allowed to knock on. "I don't know if I belong in his world," she said. "What if I embarrass myself? What if it changes how he sees me or how I see myself?" Lily was quiet for a moment, then said something Emma would carry for years. "You've spent your whole life making space for others. Maybe it's time you see what space feels like when someone makes it for you. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the rain against the window, the city buses humming below, the quiet tick of the old clock. Her mind wandered back to the cafe, to the laughter, the judgment, the way people had made her feel small. She thought of Charles, his eyes not filled with wealth, but with weariness and hope. And she thought of her mother, who used to say, "Don't wait for life to come find you. Sometimes you have to go looking for it." By sunrise, her decision was made. She packed light. One small bag, her worn journal, 2 changes of clothes, and the book she'd been too tired to finish for months. She left grocery money on the fridge along with a note, and when she hugged Lily goodbye, it lasted just a little longer than usual. At the train station, Emma stood on the platform, her heart caught somewhere between hesitation and hope. When the train pulled in and the doors opened with a soft hiss, she stepped forward. Not into luxury, not into a fantasy, but into the unknown. Charles was already waiting in the cabin. No bodyguards, no fanfare, just him. Seated by the window, a book resting in his lap, and 2 coffees on the table. He looked up as she entered and smiled. Not the polished smile of a man used to being served, but something warmer, something real. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. Emma slid into the seat across from him, gently placing her bag by her feet. "I didn't think I would either," she replied, "but then I remembered, the world doesn't change unless you walk into it." He nodded slowly. "I'm not offering anything. No promises, no golden path. I just thought, maybe it's time I stopped walking alone." Emma turned to the window as the city began to fade, buildings giving way to trees, the rhythm of the train settling into her chest like a second heartbeat. Then she looked back at him. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe we both needed someone to remind us that we're still allowed to choose something different." And with that, the train carried them forward, not toward answers, but toward something neither of them had felt in a long time: possibility. 2 unlikely travelers, bound not by destiny, but by choice. Emma didn't know exactly where the journey would lead, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the answer. She wasn't chasing escape or wealth or fantasy. She was walking into something real. And that, she realized, was enough. The days that followed were unlike anything she had ever known. There were no 5-star hotels, no yachts, no champagne brunches. Instead, she woke up in quiet villages and dusty towns, in modest guest houses and repurposed community centers. She rode in the back of Charles's old Jeep, windows down, hair tangled in the wind. He didn't live like the billionaire the world believed him to be. They visited orphanages on the outskirts of small cities where children sprinted into Charles's arms, shouting his name. Not because he brought gifts, but because he remembered birthdays, favorite books, and inside jokes. They spent hours at recovery shelters where Charles spoke little but listened deeply. They sat on porches of homes half-built by hands he had funded but never claimed, eating soup made by people who had no idea the man across from them owned half the skyline. Emma watched all of it in quiet awe. He never announced himself, never looked for credit, never corrected people when they assumed he was just another kind traveler passing through. One afternoon in a food pantry in Vermont, while they sorted boxes of canned goods, she finally asked him, "Why don't you tell people who you are?" He shrugged. "Because the moment I do, they stop talking to me like I'm human." Everywhere they went, Emma saw it, the way his eyes scanned the room, not for recognition or applause, but for something more fragile: connection. And more than once, as she caught her reflection in a dusty window or store glass, she realized she wasn't just watching someone else's transformation, she was living her own. She was smiling in a way she hadn't in years. One night, in a cabin nestled at the edge of a forest in Quebec, they sat on the porch beneath a sky stitched with stars. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the soft chirping of crickets filled the space between them. A single lantern glowed on the wooden table, casting golden halos across their cups. Charles had brewed chamomile tea. Emma curled into a wool blanket, hands wrapped around her mug, watching the steam rise in delicate swirls. They hadn't spoken in some time, but it wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be broken. It was a silence that felt like breathing together. Eventually, Charles leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the tree line beyond the porch. "I've had people offer me everything," he said quietly. "Comfort, companionship, even love." He paused. Then, turning to her, his voice softened further. "But I don't need someone to love me. I need someone who understands why I love the things I do. Someone who doesn't need to be dazzled, just present." Emma didn't answer right away. She let his words hang in the night air, tender, vulnerable, and unadorned. Then she looked at him, her eyes catching the lantern light and something deeper. "I don't know if I'm that person," she said honestly. "I don't know if I understand all the reasons why you are who you are." She took a slow breath. "But I do know this. I've never felt more like myself than I do when I'm with you." Charles didn't smile. He didn't look triumphant. He simply looked peaceful, like someone who had just heard the answer he didn't know he'd been waiting for. They didn't reach for each other's hands. They didn't lean in for anything more. Because what they shared wasn't about closeness and distance, it was about recognition. Two people, generations apart, shaped by vastly different lives, finding a quiet resonance in the space between their scars. Later that night, Emma sat by the cabin window, writing in her journal. Her thoughts came in half sentences, stray words. Quiet. Found. Seen. She closed the book, tucked it under her pillow, and whispered into the hush. "I didn't come looking for love, but maybe I stumbled into something braver." Outside, the stars blinked above like quiet witnesses to a story still unfolding. Not a story of fate or fantasy, but of two souls who had once believed they were alone, until they weren't. 3 months. 3 months of quiet mornings and unhurried conversations. Of listening more than speaking. Of seeing the world not from penthouse windows, but from stoops, food lines, and crowded community halls. Emma had changed, but not in the way people usually mean. She wasn't wealthier. She didn't dress differently. Her shoes were still worn at the edges, her journals still filled with scribbled thoughts and creased corners. But something inside her had shifted. She walked straighter, spoke more slowly, felt no need to explain her worth to anyone anymore. Charles noticed it too. They had just returned from a visit to a women's shelter in Detroit when he asked to speak with her privately. They sat on the rooftop terrace of a converted church they were helping fund, the skyline glowing behind them in soft golds and grays. He handed her a folder. Simple, unadorned, no ribbon, no ceremony. Inside were the legal documents to establish a foundation in her name, the Emma Bennett Opportunity Fund. She looked up slowly. "I want to leave something behind," he said, "but not in my name. I've done enough of that. I want the next girl, the one waiting tables, taking care of her sister, thinking no one sees her, to know that someone did." Emma didn't respond right away. She traced her fingers over the folder's edge, the weight of it settling into her hands and heart. Charles spoke again, gentler now. "You don't have to run it. You don't even have to be involved, but it will exist. Because you did. Because one person chose to see someone, not for what they had, but for who they were." Emma's voice came soft, but certain. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he smiled. But she did. She drew in a breath, long, steady, sure. "I'm honored," she said, "more than I can express. But if it's all right, I'd like to try something else." He nodded, listening. "I want to build something on my own. It doesn't need to bear my name, or yours. I want to start from the ground up. Not because I don't value what you're offering, but because someone once believed in me. Enough to let me believe in myself." Her voice didn't waver. "And I want to offer that same belief to others, not through money, through presence, through listening, through being there when no one else shows up." Charles was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, not with surprise, but with that quiet, radiant pride of someone who had known all along this day would come. "You already have," he said. Emma looked at him. The man who had once sat trembling in a cafe, ridiculed and dismissed. Now he was her mirror, her mentor, her friend. There was no label for what they were. Not lovers, not partners, not quite family. But something more enduring, a kind of soul recognition, a shared truth that didn't need to be defined. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. "No matter what you do," he said softly, "I'll be in your corner, always." She nodded, eyes shimmering. And in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. Their story had never been about grand declarations or perfect timing. It had been built on quiet choices, patient belief, and the courage to let each other grow, to let go, not out of loss, but out of trust. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows over the rooftops. They had come to see the city not just as a place, but as a promise that kindness, when offered without condition, always finds its way back, and that sometimes the truest form of love is letting someone walk their own road, knowing they carry a piece of you with every step. The rain had returned, soft, steady, as the final letters were pressed onto the cafe window. The first cup. Emma stood across the street, umbrella in hand, watching her vision come to life. This wasn't just a cafe. It was the cafe. The one where everything began, where a man once stood, soaked and ashamed, fumbling for a forgotten wallet, where she, a waitress with little to give, had quietly offered a $5 bill and unknowingly rewritten the course of her life. Now, the space was hers, but more importantly, it belonged to everyone. She had rebuilt it from scratch, painted the walls, refinished the floors, replaced the lights, with the help of volunteers, small donors, and quiet encouragement from someone who never asked for recognition. Etched beneath the glass logo was a simple promise: no one should have to earn kindness. Inside, the cafe glowed. Warm lights, soft jazz, shelves of books, the hum of quiet conversation wrapped around the room like a familiar blanket. A chalkboard behind the counter didn't list prices. It read, "Your first cup is on us. Your second, if you can, on someone else." A piano waited in the corner for the afternoon trio. Tables weren't numbered. They bore names, handwritten cards that read, "Hope, Trust, Begin." Emma stood near the window, watching the gentle rhythm of humanity. An exhausted nurse, a delivery driver, a mother and two laughing children. A space for rest, a space for dignity. Then, the door opened. A man stepped inside, older, hunched, soaked from the rain. His coat was threadbare, his hands trembling as he held the door open, uncertain. A young barista hesitated behind the counter. "Sir, this place is for customers only. If you don't have..." Emma crossed the room before he could finish. She laid a calm hand on the barista's shoulder. "It's all right," she said. She turned to the man with the same warmth she once gave a stranger in need. "Would you like a seat by the window?" He nodded, eyes damp but grateful. "Just something warm," he murmured. "To sit for a bit. It's been a long morning." Emma's voice softened. "Then let's make it a little longer, with peace." She turned to the barista and offered a gentle nod. No judgment, no correction, just a reminder that this place was never built on rules, only on grace. Here, the first cup is always on us. No questions, no shame. The man nodded, eyes wide, a quiet lesson absorbed. As Emma turned to head toward the back, something made her pause. She looked out the window, and there he was. Charles, standing across the street beneath a black umbrella, coat collar turned up against the rain. He didn't wave, he didn't come inside. He just stood there, watching. His face was calm, eyes warm. Emma met his gaze, and in that still moment, something passed between them. Gratitude, farewell, and something else, something unspoken. A promise. He nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the rain. Later that day, during the soft opening, the cafe was full. every seat taken. The air buzzing with soft laughter, low jazz, and the scent of cinnamon and coffee. Emma stood beside the piano, a microphone in one hand, a warm cup in the other. She looked around at the space she'd built, not just with tools or money, but with belief. Years ago, she began, I paid for someone's coffee. Her voice was steady but tender. I didn't know who he was. I just saw someone being made small, and I couldn't look away. She paused, glancing around. Some nodded, others blinked back tears. That cup cost me $5, but what it gave me, she smiled, was a new way to see the world. I thought I was helping someone who was lost, but it turns out he helped me find a version of myself I didn't know I was allowed to become. She placed the cup gently on the piano. This cafe, she looked around, eyes soft, isn't about selling coffee. It's about presence, about dignity, about saying, you matter, you're welcome, just as you are. A quiet wave of emotion swept through the room. Outside, the rain had lightened to a mist. Inside, warmth had taken root. And in the heart of it all stood a woman who had once given a stranger a cup of coffee, and in return found the courage to build a world where kindness needed no permission. It's about showing up, especially when no one else does. Her voice softened, the room quiet. A man once told me, kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be continued. She smiled. So that's what we're doing here. One cup at a time. Then, almost as an afterthought, her eyes glinting with quiet truth. Some loves don't need romance. Some lives are changed by nothing more than a kind gesture and the courage to mean it. Applause rose, soft and sincere. A saxophone began to play in the corner, and somewhere in the back, a first cup was poured for someone who didn't know they needed it until they did. And just like that, it began again. Thank you for walking this journey with us, one sparked by a simple act of compassion on a rainy morning and transformed into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Emma didn't need a miracle. She wasn't chasing fortune or fame. All she did was choose to care when it would have been easier to walk away. And sometimes that's all it takes, not just to change one life, but two. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet power of presence, don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories, where we share tales that heal, uplift, and remind us what it means to be deeply, beautifully human. We'll see you in the next one, where another soul is waiting to be seen.